In 2019, archaeologists at Shanidar Cave in the foothills of Iraqi Kurdistan uncovered a Neanderthal skeleton that had been deliberately placed in the ground 70,000 years ago. The body was positioned on its left side, legs slightly flexed. The grave had been cut into the sediment. The stratigraphy, the layering of soil above and below, was consistent with deliberate burial. This was not an accident of geology. This was not a body that fell and was covered by sediment over time. Someone placed it there. This was not the first time something like this had been found. But it was the clearest recent evidence that the species we spent 150 years calling brutish, primitive, and incapable of abstract thought had been doing something we assumed was exclusively ours. 60,000 years ago, somewhere in what is now France, a group of Neanderthals dug a hole. What they put in it and why is the question this episode is inside. The Neanderthal occupied Europe and Western Asia for at least 200,000 years before our species arrived. They were not small-brained. Their average cranial capacity slightly exceeded our own. But the architecture of their brain was different, the frontal lobe proportions, the connectivity, the internal organization that neurological models suggest enabled the kind of long-range planning and symbolic abstraction we associate with behavioral modernity. For most of the 20th century, the consensus was clear. Neanderthals made tools, hunted large prey, used fire, and survived ice ages. But they did not think symbolically. They did not create art. They did not bury their dead with intention. The reasoning seemed secure. The evidence of burial in the archaeological record was circumstantial. Bodies found in caves could have been there for many reasons. A body in a depression in the sediment could be coincidence, not ceremony. And then the evidence started accumulating. What burial actually requires at the cognitive level is specific. You have to understand that the person is dead. Not merely absent, but gone in a way that is permanent and categorically different from sleep. You have to distinguish between the person and the body to recognize that what is left behind is not the same as what was lost. And you have to feel something for it. Some sense that the body deserves more than exposure. Those are not simple operations. For most of the 20th century, the scientific consensus assumed only one species had ever performed them. The evidence now says otherwise. The Shanidar Cave site in Iraqi Kurdistan has been at the center of this debate since the 1950s, when Ralph Seletsky excavated 10 Neanderthal individuals there. One of them, Shanidar 4, was surrounded by unusual concentrations of pollen. Seletsky proposed in 1975 that the individual had been buried with flowers. The interpretation was contested immediately. Pollen could arrive naturally, blown in or carried by burrowing animals. The flowers have never been definitively confirmed. What was confirmed in 2020 is something harder to dismiss. Emma Pomeroy and her colleagues at Cambridge, Birkbeck, and Liverpool John Moores universities returned to Shanidar Cave and, in excavations beginning in 2014, found a new individual, Shanidar Z. The remains were articulated, bones still in anatomical relationship, as they would be if the body had been buried before decomposition rather than falling into position naturally over time. The grave was cut into the sediment. Multiple lines of stratigraphic analysis confirmed the burial context. The paper was published in the journal Antiquity in 2020. Its conclusion was careful and precise. The evidence, taken together with the stratigraphic and sedimentological data, makes a strong case for deliberate burial in a cut feature. Shanidar Z was placed in that ground by other Neanderthals 70,000 years ago. The act was intentional. The most rigorous confirmation of Neanderthal burial came not from a new site but from one that had been known for over a century. In 1908, in a small cave in the Corrèze region of southwest France, La Chapelle-aux-Saints, 3 brothers excavating found a nearly complete Neanderthal skeleton in a pit. The discovery launched a century of argument about whether the pit was natural or deliberate, whether the body was placed or fell, whether this counted as burial in any intentional sense. In 2014, a research team led by William Rondeau at the University of Bordeaux published the results of a 12-year excavation and analysis project in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. They mapped the pit's boundaries with precision. They analyzed the soil strata at every layer. They compared the geology of the pit's walls and base to the surrounding sediment. The conclusion was unambiguous. The pit at La Chapelle-aux Saints was not natural. It was dug. The Neanderthal of La Chapelle-aux Saints was deposited in a pit excavated by other members of its group, then protected by a rapid covering. The paper went further. This is sufficient evidence for intentional burial and for the cognitive capacity to produce it. The skeleton had been in that deliberate grave for 50,000 years before the Buissoni brothers found it. The hole was made for a reason. Someone decided this body needed to go into the ground. This behavior is not distant. Every grave that has ever been dug in every culture on every continent, across the entire span of recorded history, is the same act. Something died that mattered. The people who remained decided the body deserved more than exposure. They put it back into the earth. The oldest confirmed evidence of this act is 60 to 70,000 years old. Precedes every known religion. Precedes agriculture. It precedes the cave paintings of Lascaux and Chauvet. It precedes every written language by 50,000 years. It precedes, according to the current evidence, the moment our species arrived in Europe and first encountered the people who were doing it. You have been burying your dead since before you were fully human. The practice was not invented by Homo sapiens. It was not taught by one civilization to another. It was already there in a species that shared a common ancestor with yours, living in caves in France and Iraq, with a brain shaped differently than the one reading this. The brain was different. The question it was asking was not. But burial was not the only evidence. In 2010, João Zilho at the University of Lisbon and his colleagues published a paper in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences analyzing 2 Neanderthal sites in the Murcia region of southeastern Spain. What they found was not bones. It was shells. Perforated shells, naturally punctured, then further prepared, some stained with red and yellow mineral pigments, others painted on their exterior surface with a mixture of iron oxides. A spondylus shell contained residue of a complex mixture, lepidocrocite, hematite, pyrite, ground together into a red paste. These are not tools. They are not food. They are ornaments, body decorations, the same class of evidence that, when found in Homo sapiens sites in Africa and the Middle East, is treated by the entire field as proof of symbolic thought and behavioral modernity. The shells were dated to around 50,000 years ago. They were made by Neanderthals, before any documented contact with modern humans. The significance of this is precise. If perforated, pigment-stained shells are evidence of symbolic thought when Homo sapiens made them, they are evidence of symbolic thought when Neanderthals made them. The same standard, the same conclusion. The species that buried its dead also wore jewelry. Whatever was happening in the Neanderthal mind, whatever cognitive operation produced the impulse to place a body in the ground and mark it, was the same operation that produced the impulse to decorate the living body. These are not separate behaviors. They are expressions of the same underlying capacity. The recognition that appearance, placement, and intention carry meaning beyond function. The brain was different. What it was doing with the world was not. The Neanderthal line ended approximately 40,000 years ago. The last of them disappeared from the fossil record, absorbed into or outcompete by the modern human populations expanding across Europe and Western Asia. We have their DNA. Between 1 and 4% of the genome of every person alive today with ancestry outside sub-Saharan Africa carries a Neanderthal inheritance. They are not gone. They are partial. What is gone is their independent existence. The branch closed. What remains is the evidence of what they did with it. They made tools. They survived ice ages. They hunted mammoths and rhinoceroses. They crossed continental distances. And they buried their dead and wore jewelry and processed mineral pigments into colors they applied to objects that served no functional purpose. The hole at La Chapelle-aux Saints is still there. Excavated, studied, photographed from every angle, sampled from every layer. 50,000 years of sediment above it. A deliberate grave, made by hands that are gone. For a person whose name no one will ever know. And in a cave in Iraqi Kurdistan, Shanidar Z still lies in the position where it was placed. In southeastern Spain, fragments of painted shell sit in museum collections. The evidence of intention outlasted the species that produced it. The question burial asks, what does a mind owe to the dead? is still the same question. It is being asked right now. In every culture that has ever existed. In the oldest confirmed form we have found, the answer was given by people who were not us. Not quite. 60,000 years ago, somewhere in what is now France, a group of Neanderthals dug a hole. The hole is still there. The DNA they left in your genome is 1 to 4% of who you are. The behavior they left in the archaeological record is harder to quantify. The question this channel is now inside: what a mind that differs from yours by 4% of its genome does with grief, with symbol, with the problem of being alive, is not finished. The next episode goes somewhere older. Not into a grave. Into the oldest form of shelter we know. And what was found inside it.